Okay. So you guys can all see that okay?
Yes, sir.
No, I don't see a syllabus.
What do you see? Maybe I
I
grabbed something.
see the picture of you currently.
Same here.
Yep.
I
Let me
can
see.
see the syllabus.
Okay, so you might have to um all right, so you can still not see the syllabus?
No. And I'm wondering, I didn't see a place to turn my camera on.
Well, it shouldn't need that, but if you go to the top, let me stop sharing for just a second. And then if you go up to the very top of the screen, you'll see something that when you go across the menu bar on the right hand side of your screen, you'll see some different things, and you'll probably see something that looks like some squares. And if you click on that, you'll see speaker, gallery, dynamic, multi-speaker, immersive. You see that?
Yep.
And
Upper right hand corner.
if you click on the one that says speaker, that should open up.
That's what we had already.
It is, and you're still
Yeah.
not seeing that.
Yeah, mine just,
Well,
and I tried everything on the bar.
that's
You
okay.
should have a tab up top that says Sean Western screen. He's sharing his screen. There's another tab that's like the meeting.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, if you've got that says Sean Western's screen.
I have Sean Western's meeting.
That's what I have.
Do you have, and then does it say screen anywhere?
Nope.
Well, that's okay. Did you, I sent you guys all a email copy of it.
I printed it off.
So if you've
Yeah,
printed it, you've got it in front of you. We'll just go through it, and then hopefully we'll get it figured out for the slides, because the slides are going to be what's important to be able to see with the screen share. But let's talk about the syllabus, just so we all are on the same page. So we will meet via Zoom. We'll use that exact same Zoom link every Wednesday from 6 to roughly 9 o'clock. Sometimes we'll end a little bit early. Couple of times we might go 5 or 10 minutes over. Don't kill me for that. The other thing is I will try to stop and take a break about every 50 minutes. Sometimes I kind of get on a roll, and so it might go a little bit longer, but every hour we'll try to take about a 10-minute break, get up, stretch our legs, do a little bit of stuff like that. The textbook, if you haven't received a textbook yet, you can get either a digital copy or a physical copy. Does everybody have the textbook yet? Ronald, I know you don't have yours because I've got your code for that, and I'll send it to you. But and if anybody else needs a textbook code, let me know.
I won't
I
have
will-
my copy until Tuesday.
Okay.
You say that was electronic? I do not have one.
Okay.
Sean, I looked for the digital copy. I could not find one. So I had to buy the textbook, but it won't be in from Amazon till the 2nd of September.
Okay. That sounds like a lot of folks. So that'll be okay. We can get that taken care of.
Okay.
So anyway, the textbook is the eighth edition of the Emergency Medical Responder. There are some optional materials. One of them is the workbook. If you want to get the workbook, that's up to you. It's not going to make a difference in the class. Some people like to have it because it helps them, do better. It's up to you. The other optional material is getting a blood pressure cuff and a stethoscope. So we will be practicing blood pressures and pulse rates and things like that. So we'll be taking vital signs. The class itself for tonight, which is week 1, we're just going to go over chapters 1 and 2. Next week, week 2, we'll do chapters 3 and 4. And then with the textbook, you get access to something called Navigate.
Yes.
And Navigate, there's a specific course ID that you need for that. So you'll want to write this down. I'm going to give it to you right now. The course ID for this particular class is 86, and then B as in Bravo, 263. So that whenever you get your textbook, there'll be a code to get into the Access Navigate, and then it'll ask for a course ID, and that's what you're going to put in that course ID. Then you'll put in your email, and it will create your own password. And in that Navigate, there's going to be quizzes that you can take, and there's going to be the tests. And then there's a bunch of other little things. There'll be some extra stuff to just study so that you can kind of get better understanding and a better grasp of what we're doing. And then I'll put some announcements in there once in a while and stuff like that. And it'll also give you an opportunity to, set up calendar if you need to remember when things are. Week 3 is chapters 5 and 6. And then in week 4, which is the 16th of September, we'll have our first exam. And the exams will be 100 questions. They will be based on the sections. So the textbook itself is broke up into 6 different sessions or sections. That code was 86B263. So you missed a 6 in there. And I'll send an email as well, or I'll probably throw it in the chat a little bit later. But the exams will be 100 questions, and there'll be multiple choice. If you take the quizzes are optional, but they will kind of steer you in the right direction on the way that the exam works. And the exams will be 10%. So the breakdown of the class, 10% per exam. There's 6 exams. So that's going to be 60% of your grade. And then there's going to be a final exam, which will be comprehensive. It will actually be 150 questions. And that's going to be worth 20% of your grade, which will take us to 80. Attendance will be 10%, and participation will be 10%. So that's how we'll get the 100% for your grades, just to keep track, because you do have to have a certain, you got to get over 75% in the class to be able to sit for the National Registry. And this class will set you up to be able to take the National Registry exam for the EMR class. And then the state of Arizona is kind of strange. They recognize EMR and they kind of don't. But we're all going to get put into the system next week. I'm going to walk you through getting onto the National Registry website and getting an ID there, as well as the state of Arizona's website and getting an ID there. So we'll go over that next week on the 2nd of November or of September. So that'll be exam 1, and exam 1 will be over the first section, which is chapters 1 through 6. Chapter 7 and chapter 8 will take place on weeks 4 and 5. And then the chapter 8 week will actually be a Saturday. So week 5 will be Saturday the 26th. That class will be here at the Mormon Lake Fire Station. We're going to start at 10 o'clock in the morning. That way you don't have to get up at dark 30 in Young and drive up here. So we'll get started at 10. We're going to do our CPR stuff then, and we'll do some other skills. We're going to check off and get those done. Then on the 30th, we'll do exam 2, which will be over airway. Chapters 9, or actually, I think chapter 9 is the airway. And then after that, after chapter 9, you'll have enough experience and enough background to be able to start assisting with patient care. So when there's a paramedic or an EMT on scene, you'll be able to assist them. So you'll notice that I've got exercises of assisting with patient care and, of course, doing your readings. In October, those chapters are pretty intense. Those are our medical chapters. And so you'll notice we really only get to go through about 1 chapter a week, which is probably good, but they are pretty intense chapters. And then in November, we get chapters 14, 15, 16, 17, and 19, or 18 and 19. You'll also notice on November 21st is another Saturday, and we will meet at the Blue Ridge Fire District and go over skills there. And then December 2nd, we'll do exam 6. And then on the 9th, which this one's going to kind of be a little bit different in the fact that the final exam is going to be open to you for a few different days. And you can just get on your computer and you'll be able to do the final exam. The exams will be timed. The quizzes will not. And a lot of people are always like, well, why are we doing that? Why are we timing the exams? So as an instructor in EMS, I have 3 goals. My first goal is always to get you, the student, through the class. Because you have to get through the class before any of the other goals matter. Second goal is to get you through the National Registry. Once you pass the National Registry, my most important goal is to make you a good street provider. The stuff that we learn in class is textbook. But those of you, in fact, it sounds like most of you have been around long enough. You've probably run some calls, and the EMTs and the paramedics are like, that was not textbook at all. The patients never read the textbook. They don't know what the classic signs are unless they're your frequent flyers, and we'll talk about some of that too. But they don't read the textbook. They don't know what they're supposed to be telling you when it comes to when you ask them questions. And I'll give you a prime example. I had this happen to me several years ago. You know, I said I've been around in this business since the early 90s. And prior to 1992, there was a couple of things that would happen. One, we were scared to death that AIDS was going to kill us all. And 2, whenever we ran EMS calls, we got as much blood on our uniform as we could. And then in 1992, we had something called the bloodborne pathogens regulation or standard come out. OSHA put out the bloodborne pathogens. And suddenly we didn't want to get any blood on us. We were still afraid of AIDS, but we didn't want to get any blood on us. So we stopped getting blood on us. And then we realized several years later that, you know, HIV just dies in air, so it's no big deal. Unless we take a needle, stick it into somebody, and then slam it right into ourselves. So we started backing off on the fact that AIDS was going to kill us all. And we started relaxing when it came to that. However, back in the day when we were afraid of that, I asked a patient one day if they had any diseases that I needed to know about. And that was the way that I posed the question. And they said no. And I went, okay. And so I went to check their blood sugar and do some other things. And another medic came up behind me, and he was getting ready to start an IV, and he asked the patient if the patient had HIV or AIDS. And the patient goes, well, yes, I am HIV and AIDS positive. And I went, wait a minute, I asked you that question, but I didn't ask it the right way. So sometimes when we communicate with our patients, we've got to kind of think about the way we're going to ask the question. So we're going to go over some of that, and we're going to talk about communicating. And so that's my third goal. My third goal is always to make you a great street provider, because at the end of the day, that's why you're here. You're here to respond to those community members, those people in our community that we serve. And I tell my firefighters all the time, and I'm sure your chiefs tell you, it's not about the chief. It's not about the department. It's not about you. It's about all those people that live in our community. That's why we're here, and we've always got to focus on that. So you'll see down at the exam schedule what the sections are. That way, when you get ready to study for the exams, you'll be able to do that. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to look the chat here and see if there's anything that I missed. Thanks. It is. Will I be able to make up? This is for the answer is yes. For classes that get missed, what you'll do is you'll be able to watch the recording. In the recording, I will put a couple of what I call Easter eggs. And those are things that I just say, hey, whenever you're watching this, mark this down. And there'll be usually 3 of them throughout the deal. In fact, we'll make this the first one. The first thing, if you're watching this video and you need to send me an email, just mention the word Easter eggs, and that'll be number 1. But that way we'll know that you watched the video, and then once you send me that with those 3 Easter eggs, you'll get the points for attendance for any classes that you missed. Any other messages on there? No, looks good. Okay, let's try sharing a screen again and see if we can make it happen. All right, can everybody see this screen? Should be EMS Systems, Chapter 1.
Yes.
Yes.
I cannot.
Which
I can't either.
Maybe we didn't log in right, Bill.
Either that, I took the link out of the syllabus, so I'm not sure
Yes,
where
so did I.
did you
it
use
says
it?
that
Are you on
you
a
joined
phone or on your computer?
on a computer. It said you
I'm on my
joined in
laptop.
audio only mode.
Oh, you joined in audio only mode?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. You need to log back out and log back in because you have to come in video. Yeah, you don't want just audio mode.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm going to drop off and get back in.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute because I'm going to look at something.
Something went wrong. Okay, I'm just going to completely log out.
Yeah, so Linda, it looks like you're in audio mode, and Tristan, you're in audio only as well. Wonder if I can change that. So the 3 of you are in audio only. So yeah, you're not going to be able to see the screen shares. Still came back in only audio mode.
John is saying, of course, I'm not sure that Sarah's not here, so I don't know if you're capable of doing that.
Well, might make it a little tougher, but starting next week, you'll be able to actually download the slides. So that way you'll be able to, because I can't change it from here. I don't know why it's only bringing you guys in as audio only. Do you have video cameras?
Yep.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I don't know. That's weird. Well, like I said, you'll be able to look at the slides online. Um, I guess you'll just have to listen to my voice and try to vision what we've got going on. So chapter 1, we're going to talk about EMS systems. Now, this is really kind of a basic understanding. Most of you work in the fire district. Most of you have been around the fire district for a little while. So you kind of understand the basics already. But as far as an introduction goes, the EMR, the emergency medical responder, is the step down from an EMT. You're going to be a step up from having first aid, but in most systems across the nation, EMRs have been around for a while. In Arizona, we just started recognizing them. And so currently, the EMR is the first medically trained person to arrive on the scene of an emergency. Now, it says here often, but in all reality, in Arizona, it's usually an EMT is the first one. But in some of these small rural areas like we work in, the EMR program is going to be taken off. So you're going to see a lot more of them statewide. And so that's kind of why we're here. Once the EMR gets on scene and they start doing an assessment, they get a basic understanding of what's going on. Then an EMT basic or a paramedic may show up. And from there, you may turn over patient care or you may hold on to patient care. For myself as a paramedic, I let my EMRs and my EMTs hold on to patient care, especially when we're on a side-by-side accident and I've got 5 or 6 patients and I'm the only paramedic. I can't just camp out on one patient. So I'll put an EMR or I'll put an EMT on a patient and then they can just kind of let me know what's going on with that patient. In our pre-hospital world in Arizona, we have nurses on helicopters, and that nurse-paramedic dynamic on a helicopter, in my opinion, and a lot of others as well, but in my opinion, is the best dynamic. Because both parties bring something to the table. And in our world in Arizona, and especially in the rural areas, we rely heavily on helicopters, and we know that that nurse and that paramedic work well together. Having worked on a helicopter with nurses, I can tell you, when we're on board that helicopter, we don't look at the nurse and go, "Oh, you're the nurse," and they look at us and go, "Oh, you're the paramedic." No, we're the flight team. We're the flight crew. And that's what we do. You know, we take care of them. Those of you that work in Blue Ridge, I know Billy's a flight medic as well, so he'll probably back me up on this if you ask him. And if he doesn't, then tell him to call me because we have to have a long conversation. But so we've got nurses in the field and they get to carry a little more stuff and do a little bit more. But when we're in that helicopter or we're on that plane or we're in that Lear jet, which was a Learjet 35, by the way, we work together and we don't have an ego. You know, we work together. We both bring something to the table and it makes it good. Physicians are part of our team, the ER physicians, and then of course there's the other health providers. And today, you know, there's a lot more going on. If you've ever been around a big event, or maybe you've seen the advertisements for the mobile IVs, those things are out there. So you may run on a call because of those things. So just know that. Overall, in the EMS system, the agencies and the personnel share an understanding of their roles. We know, we understand what we're doing. You know, the very first thing that happens, and we as EMR providers and EMTs and paramedics, we have a responsibility to our communities to go out there and share with them. we need to teach them how to utilize the 911 system. Everybody knows how to call it, but not everybody really knows how to utilize it. And we do this how? We do it through teaching the CPR classes to the community, teaching the Stop the Bleed to the community. You as an EMR provider, those are things that you can do, because when you become certified as an EMR, you now have a level of education that they don't have. So therefore, you can go out there and you can be the expert. You know, you don't have to be a paramedic to do that kind of stuff. But we want to go out there and we want to train our personnel and our community on CPR and first aid and stop the bleed and all of these different things. It's also a great opportunity for us to market ourselves as the rural department to those communities. Most all of us, in fact, I believe all three of our communities that are represented here, you know, we've got a lot of homes that are summer homes. And the people who come up from the valley, they believe that they have the same level of service in Phoenix that we have up here. They're very surprised when they find out that only 2 people show up on a fire truck, and maybe only one of them is medically trained. So they get an education real quick. But when we go into the communities, we can help them with that, and we can teach them to report it. And then some of you work in dispatch, so you understand that world. If you do not work in dispatch or you're not familiar with it, I encourage you at some point in time in the next year, go spend 8-12 hours in the dispatch center. See how things are. Listen to what they're listening for. See what they're doing. And I always encourage dispatchers to go ride in the field, because we need to understand each other's roles. Sometimes we get frustrated because we can't get a hold of dispatcher. They're not responding to us. You know, meanwhile, they've got 4 agencies in their ear. So we got to think about that, and vice versa. They get frustrated with us because, you know, we're working a code. I don't have time to get on the radio and give them an update. So, you know, we got to think about those things. First responses, EMS, EMTs, paramedics, and then the goal is to get them to the hospital. And then, of course, we've got medical oversight. And if you're familiar with most all of us, every one of us has a medical director. We have a doctor who is in charge of us, and we actually work under their license. So it's important that we understand that. We work under their license, so they get to kind of set what we do. We're going to learn some stuff that you may not be able to do in the field, especially with the EMTs. There's a lot of agencies where they're not allowed to start IVs, even though in the state of Arizona, if you look up the protocol, an EMT basic can start an IV. But their medical director doesn't want them to do that. So the way our protocols work, the way our systems work is, you know, we're trained to a national level. We are trained to the national registry level of EMR, EMT, and paramedic. That's our training level. So there's a certain amount of things that we learn. Then the state of Arizona, DHS says, okay, this is what we're going to allow you to do in the state of Arizona. So you're certified in the state, you can do this under our protocols. And then your local hospital says, okay, the state says you can do this, but we're only going to allow you to do this. And it could even go down. You know, your chief might go, you know, yeah, the hospital allows us to do that, but we don't want you to. That can even happen. Most of the time it doesn't, because we all, you know that the more skills you have, the more things you can do, the better off we're going to be in the long run, because we're here to take care of patients. That's our goal. That's our job. So that's the medical oversight. And then you've got somebody like Billy in Blue Ridge, and I don't know who does it in Pleasant Valley, but they look over your chart and they'll do some QI stuff, or QI stuff. So reporting, again, they got to call 911. They have to report that incident, and it usually goes through what they call a PSAP, which is a public safety, I can't even remember the answering point. So then we got a PSAP, and then in Young, I think you guys go through Payson. In Blue Ridge, you guys go through the city of Flagstaff. And in Mormon Lake, we go through Guardian Medical Ground Air units. So those are our local answering points for incidents. And usually they all start out, the 911 call goes to a sheriff's office most of the time. It does in Coconino, and I believe the same thing in Gila County. It starts out there. So dispatch's job is to take the information and then dispatch the appropriate equipment and personnel. That's their job. And then they'll try to walk the patient through some things. So if you ever get on scene, you know, they might be doing CPR and maybe the dispatcher walked them through that. So that does happen. Now, we as providers, especially in rural areas, you know, we have areas that are outside of our boundaries that we respond to. And so sometimes we have to pay attention and make sure that one, we are getting dispatched, because just because it's outside our boundary line doesn't mean that we won't go there. Blue Ridge runs up into Mormon Lake all the time, and we go down into not the Blue Ridge Fire District area, but the area that their ambulance covers, and run calls down there too. And sometimes our dispatcher doesn't always send us to the right times, doesn't send us when we really should go. First response is usually us. That's firefighters, it's law enforcement, and firefighters and law enforcement can both be trained in EMR. It's going to be you. You're going to be that first person there. And you are going to be very important to that situation. Pleasant Valley is dispatched through Gila County Sheriff's Office in Globe. Thank you. Perfect. So that's going to be important. You're going to get on scene and you're going to start patient care. You may be extricating, you may be doing some other stuff from the fire standpoint, but you're also going to be taking patient care. So EMS response, ambulances are typically in the state of Arizona staffed by either EMTs or paramedics, and most of the time it's one EMT and one paramedic. However, you as an EMR provider will basically become the first level of care on that ambulance. So you might be driving that ambulance the way the EMT normally would, and an EMT may be in the back or the paramedic may be in the back. The biggest thing is, it doesn't matter what your training level is, it matters what equipment you have. As a paramedic, there's been a few times I've worked in agencies where we didn't have ALS gear. So I was only an EMT. And in fact, when I first came to Mormon Lake 8 years ago, they didn't even really run EMS. They had some EMTs, but they didn't have a base hospital. And I came in, one of the first things I did was found a cardiac monitor, went to the hospital and got us a drug box and bought us some ALS equipment to start providing ALS. But for the first 8 months that I was in Mormon Lake, even though I had paramedic certification, I was only allowed to work as an EMT basic. And so the same thing will happen with you. You know, if you move up from EMR to EMT or to paramedic, you're only as good as the equipment that you have. So just keep that in mind. But very important that we're there. All skill levels are based off of the EMR course. And I kind of mentioned this earlier. This is sort of the stepping stone. Some of you, my hope is that you will go on and become EMT basics, and a few of you might even go on and become paramedics. That's my goal. I would love to see that happen. Because that's, you know, our communities need those things. Our communities need the greatest level of care that we can provide them. Hospital care, the biggest thing we need to know as an EMR provider is know where your specialized treatment facilities are. Blue Ridge and Pleasant Valley, most of your patients probably go to Payson. In Blue Ridge and Mormon Lake, most of our patients go to Flagstaff. So Blue Ridge, you're kind of in the middle. You get Payson and Flag both. But we have specialized treatment cares. We've got trauma centers. Flagstaff happens to be one. But cardiac centers, stroke centers, burn centers, all of these things are specialized care, and we need to know where those facilities are. Now, in our areas, we're going to be flying these patients that need specialized care. But I will tell you, sometimes it's incumbent upon us to make sure that the patient goes to the right facility. Because there are times that crews want to just go to a hospital because that's where they want to go and not because it's in the best interest of the crew or the patient. So public health departments, not going to really get into this too much. Just understand that once in a while we do have to work with public health. We did it a lot during COVID. And if you've got an incident, maybe in one of your restaurants that has some problems coming up or whatever, you may have to work with the public health department. But if you have a epidemic of some kind, let's say you had a major measles outbreak in your area, you have a responsibility as an EMR, as an EMT, as a paramedic to contact the public health department. Most likely the hospital will, but you also have a responsibility to do so. Education and screenings, we've already talked about this. As an EMR, it's a great opportunity to go out there and help your community with things like car seat installations, alcohol awareness programs, even bicycle and motorcycle helmet use. Some of us do bicycle rodeos with our younger population. Most all of us, in fact, I believe all three of us, and I say us, I'm talking about our 3 fire districts. We have people stop by our station just to get their blood pressure checked on a regular basis. And so different things like that. That's all part of being a public health provider. Human trafficking, we've got to be aware of these kinds of things because you're going to see them, here recently. And when I say recently, within the last 5 years or so, you guys are all familiar with the situation that happened in Flagstaff. And in fact, I just saw a news article where that gentleman from Colorado City was just convicted again yesterday, or he was convicted and he's going to get sentenced here in a couple of weeks. But that was kind of a human trafficking kind of a thing. And it happened to be somebody was driving behind him and noticed something out of the ordinary and called it in. And there were kids in a trailer. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the situation, so I'm not going to get too into it. But those are the kinds of things that we might see. So we need to look at those things and we need to be aware of them. And the same thing goes with child abuse and some of the other stuff. We got to watch for that kind of thing. So just kind of keep an eye out for that. In the history of EMS, just so we all understand, EMS as we understand it today has really only been around since the late 60s and early 70s. And prior to that, doctors would do house calls. The ambulance companies were run out of funeral homes, and we didn't have EMTs and paramedics. In the late 60s, there was a paper written and was talking about dying on the highways. And so then they created this thing called an EMT, which is an emergency medical technician. And then in the early 70s, doctors were realizing that they couldn't get to cardiac patients. And so then they started utilizing these things called paramedics. A lot of the first paramedics had worked as medics in the military. So they kind of had a good understanding. They were in Vietnam and things like that. And they came back and started this whole thing called a paramedic. And most of us, with the exception of maybe Ronald, are old enough to remember a television show called Emergency. I will tell you specifically that without that show, I probably wouldn't have grown up to become a paramedic. But from the time I was 5 years old, that's all I ever wanted to do. I wanted to be a firefighter paramedic. And at 25 years old, I had met that goal. And then all of a sudden I was sitting there going, well, what am I going to do now? And to be honest with you, I never thought in a lifetime I would be a fire chief, but yet here I am. So there you go, 1966, the Accidental Death and Dismemberment Disability paper was published, and that's what started this whole concept of having emergency care in the streets. And if you took an EMT class prior to the mid 1990s, like the three chiefs did, we learned a lot about trauma. We spent 2 months of our EMT class on trauma and about 1 week or 2 weeks on medical calls. And then we got out into the field and suddenly, 80% of our calls were medical, and we're standing around with this really cool trauma assessment, and we had to somehow adapt it to run medical calls. It was crazy at the time. Fortunately, in the mid 90s, somebody got smart and said, hey, let's start making this more like it really should be. And they started marrying that up, because those of us that took an EMT class back in the early 90s and then went to paramedic school in the mid 90s, they basically had to make us forget everything we learned as an EMT and as an EMR. Today, it's a nice progression, EMR to EMT to paramedic. So they just kind of step their way through. During the 70s and 80s, the use of ALS became very common. You all work in an area that has a CON, and the CON was required because in the 70s and the early 80s, anybody who had a van could roll up and be a provider and transport to the hospital. And the state of Arizona and DHS said, we need to start regulating this. And so then they created this thing called a CON. And that's how we got that process. And if you ever get a chance, watch a movie called Mother Jugs and Speed, because it's kind of a great little spoof and on the way things were in the 70s when it came to EMS. So it's kind of fun. It's a neat little movie to watch. And then there's a new one out, I think called Ambulance or something. That's sort of the newest version of that for today's deal. But EMS clinicians are now trained through standardized courses. And again, we line up nicely. We can go EMR, get a good basic understanding, which leads nicely into EMT. And then if we want to go on to become paramedic, we just kind of learn our way through. So very good information. So the 11 standards of the EMS system, we're going to go through this, and then we're going to take a break. So policy, regulation, resource management, human resources and training, transportation and equipment, medical and support facilities, communication systems. Chances are every one of you are familiar with these 6 because we have them, right? We've got policies, we've got regulations that we use for our EMS programs in our departments. Resource management, that's kind of us. We're the human resources. We've got training, your departments probably have monthly training for you all, as well as when you're on shift. We also have CEs. You got to do so many CEs. And once you become an EMR, you'll have CEs. So when your EMTs and your paramedics are sitting on the computer and they're looking over the tape and chart from the hospital, guess what? You're going to be sitting there with them because you've got so many hours you're going to have to do every year. Transportation and equipment, we've got those things in place. Whether we've got rescues or we've got actual ambulances like Blue Ridge, and then the medical and support facilities, taking them to the hospitals, communication systems, we all have radios, public information and education. This is one that in EMS we've lacked, and it's really not our fault. It's just unfortunately in smaller departments and even in large departments, when the budgets get cut, the education department and the public information sections seem to get cut first. But we need to be out there doing that. And that's where we can do our CPR classes and things like that. Medical direction, we already talked about that. That's our doctor that's in charge of us. Whether you have one just specific for your department or you go through the hospital, whether it's Cobra Valley in Globe or Lewis R. Pyle Memorial, which I don't think it's called that anymore in Payson. It was back when I lived in Payson and my mother worked there. But and then also Flagstaff Medical Center, or in my case, I'm actually based out of Prescott, which is Yavapai Regional Medical Center. Trauma systems and development of those, evaluating, that's where we were talking about QA, QI, things like that. And then preparedness, being ready for the next big thing. That's what you're doing here. That's what we're going to be learning. So those are the important things. I've got 1905 on my clock. Let's take a break. We'll come back at 1915. Sound like a plan?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
All right. We'll
Yeah.
see you shortly.
Hey, Sean,
Yes, sir.
this is Bill.
Yes, sir.
I went out and downloaded the app off the web. Instead of going in through a browser, I went into the app itself, and
Uh-huh.
it's working. It's working fine now.
Oh, perfect.
So
Okay,
if you
so-
don't have the app, you should go and get the latest version of it, and try to sign in through the app, not a browser.
Perfect. Remind me, and we will mention that when everybody comes back, just to make sure everybody heard that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do we just stay in this meeting and just take a
Yes.
small break?
Yep. Yeah, just stay in the meeting, take a break. We'll see you in a few minutes.
Okay, I wanted to ask if I end up cutting out because I was on the road, do I just text you and let you know?
Yeah, if you drop something, let me know. And then
Okay.
either probably Friday or Saturday, or whatever day you're available, come on down to the station and I'll get you that textbook.
Okay. And then everything that we went over today is gonna be on all the textbook, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We back.
I don't see anybody.
Oh, we
Bill?
should be. We should be back.
I figure.
Okay, got about, it's about 15 after. So we'll go ahead and start up again. Okay, so a word about patient transport. Patient's condition requires care. They may need to get transported to the hospital, they may not. But it's not always the most important factor. Our care on scene is the most important factor. Now, I will say this. If they need prompt transport, if their condition is serious enough, we don't need to spend time on scene. We can get them in the back of an ambulance and we can do treatments en route to the hospital. We can get a helicopter there as quick as possible. There are some people in our line of work that feel like they need to check off every box. I am not those some people. I will check off the boxes that absolutely need to get checked off. And if I turn over patient care and not all the boxes have been checked off, I'm okay with that. Because those people that take over patient care can continue checking off those boxes. Don't get hung up on, oh, I've got to get all of this stuff done before we turn over patient care. Sometimes I don't get the IV established before I turn over patient care. Sometimes I don't get this or that done. It doesn't matter. What's in the best interest of that patient is to get them where they need to go. It might be me just taking care of them on scene and letting them sign a refusal. It might be me putting them on a helicopter. But it's getting them where they need to go, because here's the bottom line. You as an EMR, our EMTs and our paramedics, we really don't save anybody's life. We prolong their life to get them to where they need to be, and that is to a medical facility, because they may need surgery. They may need a lot of other things that we don't have access to. Stroke patients need things that we can't give them. So we don't want to get caught up on, oh, we're saving this person's life. We want to get caught up on, we're getting this patient an assessment done on them, we're treating what needs to be treated, and we're getting them to where they need to go. That's what we do, and that's what's the most important thing for us to do. Rapid transport is, hey, we're going to get them loaded and we're going to get out of here. And we've all seen those patients. We've all seen those ones where as soon as we get them out of the car, they're on the gurney, they're in the back of the ambulance, and we're going code 3 to the hospital. We're doing everything en route. Now, that's when you need those extra hands. That's when an EMR might be in the back helping out as well. So just know that, you're not always just going to be driving the ambulance. You might be riding in the back helping the EMT or the paramedic out. So just know that. And then we're going to get them to that appropriate facility, because that's what our job is. Skills and knowledge gained from this EMR course, again, are the foundation. I don't really need to tell you that. We've already talked about it. You're going to learn these skills. You're going to learn how to control their airway, their breathing, their circulation. You're going to learn how to control their external bleeding. You're going to learn how to treat for shock. You're going to learn how to manage wounds. You're going to learn how to splint injuries. Wait a minute. Isn't that all the stuff you do as a first aider? Didn't you learn that when you took your CPR class, when you took your stop to bleed class? We learned all of that, right? Yeah. But we're going to learn it a little more in depth, because there's a few other things that we're going to do. But more importantly, this is where we're really going to be able to help out, is in this next main group. And that is the serious illness problems, seizures, altered mental status, heart attacks, poisonings, your behavioral emergencies, emergency childbirth. I have delivered one kid in the field. I went 17 years in my career, and then I had my first childbirth in the field. I wanted to try to go my whole career without giving childbirth, but that didn't work out. The main goals for this training, we already talked about this. I'm not going to go back through it. But I just want you to know that we're going to get through the class. We're going to get through the National Registry, and we're going to become great providers. Now, when it says never judge patients based on their cultural background, religion, skin color, gender, sexual orientation, we should never do that anyway. Whether we're an EMR or we're just a firefighter volunteer who just showed up to the department yesterday, we should never judge patients on any of those things. I will tell you, the hardest thing to do is to not judge individuals who caused the problem we're responding to. In other words, the drunk guy that caused the wreck, the parents who abused their child, the children who abused their parents, their elderly parents. Those things are hard not to judge, but we cannot do it. We cannot. We have to do our job. Get the patient, get the child, get the elderly adult, get the individual to a place where they are better off, because our number one goal is to leave the patient better than when we found them. We need to know the life support. It's not a bad idea to carry a small bag in your car, especially when we work in these rural areas. You might respond directly to the scene, POV. So, I'm sure your departments would be more than happy to give you a little bit of bag with some stuff in it if you're going to be responding POV to a call. Sometimes we have to improvise. Sometimes we have to use that little thing between our ears called our brain. And we got to come up with some ideas on how we can do things a little bit different, because whatever we don't have, we still may need to do some things. We might need to use a belt to use as a tourniquet. The other day, well, it's been probably a month ago, we actually broke out something called a KED board. A KED board is something that we used to carry, and every EMT class learned how to use this thing. And it's like a short spine board that wrapped around, and there was all these little things we had to know about it. Well, we actually broke one out to get a little kid out of a side-by-side, because it was the best way to get them, and that's what they were designed for anyway. So sometimes we have to improvise. And then, of course, you've got to know what your procedures are. The best thing an EMR can do is learn your basic assessment skills and learn your basic skills for treatments. The second best thing you can do is learn the things on how you can help your EMTs and your paramedics do their job. And by that, I mean, hey, the paramedic may teach you how to put a patient on a cardiac monitor so that they don't have to worry about getting the electrodes in place while they're going through some other stuff in their mind. So we're in a rural setting, so our things are going to change a little bit. We're in a climate that's probably going to require us to deal with cool weather. I believe all three of us deal with snow. Blue Ridge and Mormon Lake deal with a lot of snow. But Young, you guys deal with your fair share of snow. And especially in the Young area, you're going to have a delayed transport because of how rural you're in. We don't have that luxury. I apologize. Let me just take this real quick because it's my Tinder crew I just sent on a fire. Yes, talk to me fast. Okay. That shouldn't be an issue. All right, thanks. Okay. All right, thanks. All right. I apologize. they're working their way over to the Camp Wood fire, if you're familiar with that, over by Baghdad. So I just sent them out just before class started. Anyway, so we've got climates we've got to deal with, but in Young, you guys may be waiting a while. It may be slow and go getting out of there, due to snow and stuff like that. So sometimes we've got to make sure that we're taking care of our patients, and we may have to deal with it in a longer time period while we're waiting on those ground transports. Your responsibilities, this one's kind of tough sometimes, especially in our world, but you got to maintain your physical and mental health. One of the things that we have not done well in pre-hospital and in the fire service is taking care of our mental health. For me personally, I know that I need to get away for at least 4 days every quarter. Fortunately, some of those are paid for trips by the fire district because I'm going to either the chief's meetings or the state fire school or stuff like that. But those give me an opportunity to get away, get off the mountain. Always maintain your equipment. When you go in the morning, check off all your equipment. If you're not responsible for checking off the ambulance, work with the EMT or the paramedic. Check off the equipment. Get to know where that equipment is on your fire trucks and on your ambulances, so that when somebody asks you for something, you can get to it quickly. Obviously, was promptly, safely to the scene. And one of the things we're going to talk a lot about, I'm going to drill it into your head, and that is scene safety. Making sure that you're protecting yourself first and foremost, because here's the reality. If you do not protect yourself, you cannot help that person. That's the second Easter egg that I want for those of you that are watching this. If you cannot protect yourself, you cannot help that other person. Appropriate assistance. If you're the first one on the scene and maybe there's not an EMT on that day, maybe there's not a paramedic on that day, you're it. You need to know, where can I get more help? Do I need to order a helicopter in? Do I need to order another ground transport unit? Maybe I need a mutual aid assignment from somebody else to come in and help me. In Mormon Lake, we do a lot of mutual aid with Blue Ridge. We get a lot of mutual aid from the Flagstaff region. So we might need to call in some additional resources because maybe this patient warrants that. Performing that patient assessment. This is going to be your job. You're going to do the patient assessment. You're going to look for those things. You're going to talk to the patient. Then you're going to administer that emergency care. You're going to give them oxygen. We're going to teach you how to put them on oxygen. That's going to be part of your job. One of the biggest things that you can do as an EMR is reassure the patient and their family members. And sometimes that's all you can do. Some of the best compliments I've ever had in my career is, he took time to talk to us and let us know what was going on. And then, of course, we're only going to move those patients when they need to be. If we need help from bystanders, grab help. I'll tell you what, there's been a few times I've had auto accidents in the forest where there's been other side-by-sides show up, and I'm grabbing people going, hey, I need you to help me do this. Or I need you to go to that truck and grab this out of that compartment. And if I didn't know where that stuff was, then they would have been walking around that truck multiple times. You're going to be assisting the EMTs, the paramedics, doing some continuity of care. And then, of course, there's that lovely thing called documentation. Most of the time, it's going to be the EMT or the paramedic that documents, but in some cases, it might be you. Or you might be the one with the clipboard writing all the information down. That could be you. Make sure you're documenting the care. Make sure you're getting the times, getting what's going on, who did it, because it is important. And if we didn't write it down, it never happened. In this document, you might be reading it 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 years from now.
Mhm.
And sometimes you do stupid things. And by that I mean, and let me tell you, everything I say, that when I say sometimes you do stupid things, this guy has done it. I promise you. I have messed more stuff up in my career than you can shake a stick at. So don't think you're going to be the first one. But I'll give you a prime example when it comes to documenting. When went on a call, there was a lady, it was in a Circle K parking lot. She was obviously hyped up on something. And she's running around the parking lot just out of her head. Well, the police department ended up arresting her. There was nothing medically wrong with her. They arrested her. We didn't have any patient care. We were just standing back. But the police department said, hey, we need you to write out this little witness statement. So I wrote it out. 3 years later, never thought about it again. 3 years later, I get a phone call. I'm being deposed into court on this particular case because she was fighting it. And they sent me my little witness statement. And I read my witness statement and I about fell out of my chair because yours truly wrote down, arrived to find patient who appeared to be on drugs. I'm no expert on who's on drugs, so that was the wrong thing to write. Fortunately, I didn't have to actually go to court and defend that writing, but be careful what you write. It can bite you. And then, of course, knowledge and skills, we're going to be keeping up on those because every single year you're going to practice them. Attitude and conduct. Now, this is just being a firefighter, right? This is just being a volunteer, being honest, conducting ourselves with integrity, being aware of the patient's feelings, motivated to get the job done. Listen, if you were not in this class, I might be concerned about your motivation. But the fact that you signed up for this class tells me you are motivated to get the job done. And then we always have to be an advocate for our patients. And this is one where I was talking about earlier when I said, you've got to make sure that the patient's going to the right facility. Just because a helicopter showed up and now they want to take this patient to Payson Hospital and this patient's got a major burn, they need to go to the burn center. You need to advocate for that. And don't be afraid to advocate for it. They make mistakes too. I know, because I flew on them helicopters. We made mistakes. And all the flight companies that I work with know that if I've got a problem, I'll call them. And we have a conversation. Because not everybody's perfect. In fact, wait a minute. Nobody's perfect. Remember that. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. I mess up and I tell the flight companies and I tell the other departments that I work with, hey, if I make a mistake, call me out on it. Let's talk about it because I'm not perfect. I'll make mistakes. And I have. In fact, I make them almost daily. Keeping our appearance neat, professional at all times. Again, this is just being a firefighter. This is you being a volunteer, right? How many of you show up wearing a ripped up t-shirt? No, you put your fire department shirt on, right? You look neat, you look professional. Why? Because that patient, that's your interaction with them. And if you walk in looking like trash, they're going to be a little concerned. Maybe not them because they're in bad shape right now, but the family members might be. So take the time, put your fire department shirt on. Or put on a fire department shirt. Sometimes I'll show up on scene and I've just got maybe a fire chief's shirt on, from the Arizona Fire Chiefs Association. Or I'm lucky enough that I have a couple of the upcoming State Fire School t-shirts for 52 that I get to wear. Just because, I know people. And if you haven't seen the new State Fire School shirts, that's what they're going to look like right there. So anyway, I'll wear those once in a while, but just, be nice, be neat and professional. We kind of already talked about the medical director. I'm not going to get too much into that. Just know that they set up the protocols. They're going to look over your work after, say, Billy with Blue Ridge checks out your stuff. And then if you need to call a hospital and talk to somebody for medical control, you're going to be talking to a nurse, but that doctor is going to be right there. And all of the protocols that we do, whether they're online or offline, are signed off by that doctor because we work under their license. Quality management, quality assurance, quality improvement. This is stuff that's done in your department. And so your stuff's going to get looked over. You might get called in and said, hey, let's talk about this. Don't take it personal. It's not. It's just, hey, we're going to try to be the best that we can be. And I will tell you, the day that you think you know everything, please walk away from this job. I don't know everything. I've been doing it for a long time. Chief Payne doesn't know everything. We just don't. We're going to do the best that we can all the time. But the minute you think you do, please walk away. There's these things, I'm going to let you just read these in the book. That's the quality management side of it. But the biggest thing is just don't cause any harm. That's all. That's the biggest thing. Don't cause any harm to the patient, because we're not there to harm them. We're there to take care of them. And everything we do should be based on scientific knowledge. And I will tell you, in the 34 years that I've been a certified paramedic, seems like forever and a day, I've seen changes. I've seen a lot of changes, but it's all been based off of scientific knowledge. There's a lot of research that goes into what we do in EMS, and it's always being changing. And that's why we do annual CEs. Efficiency and equitability, we're going to always treat everybody the same. Here's what I will tell you, and God rest my mother's soul and my grandmother's soul. But I always look at my patients as if they're a family member, and I treat them accordingly. So, we're always going to do that. Make sure you treat everybody respectfully. Once you're certified, you've got to follow the national and state standards, and you got to keep up with your skills. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. I'm not going to get into the summary. That is chapter 1. Is there any questions on chapter 1? I'm going to stop sharing chapter 1. Anybody got any questions? If not, we'll jump right into 2.
No, I don't got no questions.
Let's get into chapter 2. There we go. Okay, so chapter 2, we're going to talk about safety and wellness. Now, I will say this. Chapter 1's great, talks about the history, talks about what we do, but chapter 2 is probably the most important chapter. For many years of my career, I didn't really think much about this. I mean, yes, safety was always there, but the wellness part of it, I didn't really think much about. I was so committed. And some of you, you work full-time jobs, you're committed to your full-time job, and then you come home, and on the weekends, you're doing stuff with the fire department. And we as fire chiefs and we as departments, we ask our volunteers to do a lot of things. But we appreciate everything you do, and your community appreciates everything you do. But sometimes you have to take a step back and you have to say, you know what, this weekend, as tough as it's going to be, I'm just not going to respond. I'm gonna take a weekend to just kind of relax and enjoy my family a little bit. Vacations are important. I didn't take a lot of them early on in my career, and in a lot of ways, I feel like I pay for it today because my back isn't what it used to be, and those kinds of things. So, workforce and wellness. Your patients, your families. There's varying degrees of distress. And here's the thing. You as an EMR, you as a volunteer firefighter, you see things. You see things that you cannot unsee. And especially when you work in small communities like we do, you run on your friends. You run on their families. You run on your own family. Those are tough. Those are real tough. I ran on my grandmother one time for difficulty breathing. And when I took her to the hospital, I made sure there was another paramedic with me. Not because I didn't think I knew what I was doing, but I just wanted to make sure I was making the right decisions. And unfortunately, she did pass away about a week later. But you see things and you have stress. So you need to recognize that. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about preventing injuries. We're going to talk about dealing with your stress. We're going to talk about infectious diseases and things like that. So, generally speaking, and I want you to take this to heart. Take care of yourself. Early on in my career, when I became a captain, one of the things I always told my firefighters was, my job as a captain is to make sure that tomorrow you go home the way you came to work today. And I believed that for many years, but today I don't. Today I believe my job as a captain, as a fire chief for where I'm at now, my job is to make sure that you have a retirement long after you decide to walk away from this career. That's what my real job is, so that you can enjoy life after you walk away. So take care of yourself. Look out for your fellow responders. Physically fitness, we tend to try to stay in good physical condition. We're a little bit better at it, I think, in our world than some of the career EMS providers, because we have the opportunity to work out, and some of those guys that work on the ambulances full time, they don't have that luxury because they're up all night. But think about your examinations. I get a physical exam every year. I hope you do too. Talk to your doctor about things. Have a good support system. We're going to talk about that. Because this career can be very physically demanding, especially in the areas we work in. Because sometimes we have to walk down the side of a mountain, and we got to take a patient and pack them all the way up to the roadway. And when it's snowing and icy and all of these different things that we deal with, it gets tough. It gets physically demanding. But we need to make sure that we're using our proper lifting techniques. We need to try to exercise on a regular basis. Most of us probably fight wildland fires, and therefore we have things that we have to do, where we do the pack tests and stuff like that. So, try to keep up that physical fitness. Cardiovascular endurance. Unfortunately, if you look at a lot of NIOSH reports when it comes to cardiovascular deaths in the fire service, most of them are in the volunteer ranks. So we don't want to be that statistic. So think about that. Think about your strength and your mobility and your flexibility. Again, you don't have to be the strongest person on the department. Maintaining good health. The American Heart Association recommends the 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobics. For me personally, I like to walk on at least 6,000 steps every single day. And I try to do somewhere around 10. Don't always succeed, but some people look at me that I can't tell you the number of times I've been stopped when I'm walking to the mailbox from the fire station, and people are like, "Hey, do you need a ride?" No, I'm just getting some exercise today. So, but anyway, keep these things up and take care of yourself. Some of the strategies are obviously planning ahead, making exercise important, and finding activities that you enjoy. I told you earlier, I enjoy snowmobiling. That'll take a lot out of you. If you've ever been snowmobiling, and probably most of you have, if you haven't, feel free to come up to Mormon Lake this winter. We'll go out snowmobiling, but it's a lot of fun. Riding horses, it takes activity to do that. So, all of these things that I enjoy doing do take some activity. I'm not the fittest guy in the world, but I'm certainly not in the worst shape. Nutrition, this is tough. I try to keep up my nutrition. I will tell you, it's a lot easier today than it was, say, 20 years ago, especially when I was working 2 full-time jobs with the fire department and another one with the ambulance company. It was tough to keep up that nutrition. But, eat your well-rounded meals. And if you need to supplement. Processed foods are not good. We do a lot of processed foods, unfortunately. Heavily salted foods. I will tell you this. In the summertime, if you're sweating a lot, don't stress the salt. You can add a little extra salt because you're probably sweating it out. And then, of course, one of the biggest problems we have in our world is alcohol and alcoholism. Um, if we eat healthy, it cuts down on our stress levels. It reduces our heart and blood vessel diseases. All these things we know. Most of us have been taught this since the time we were born. Hydration. Hydration and sleep are two of the most important things you can do. One, drink fluids all the time. Mix some electrolytes in there. Drink some solid fluids. Carry a water bottle with you. Carry a half Gatorade, half water bottle with you. Make sure that after you're on a scene, your fire trucks, your ambulances should all have bottles of water. Grab one. Hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. And then, of course, try to get good sleep. It's tough for us, especially when we're at home and the alarm goes off, and we have to get up. I will say that since I've been in Mormon Lake, I've gotten more nights of sleep than I've had in my entire career, which is kind of nice. So that's one of the reasons why I came up here. Stress, here's what I'll say. Every call is going to take an emotional strain. Every one of them, whether you know the patient or not, whether it's a kid or it's an adult or it's this or it's that, they're all going to take a toll. What you need to do is make sure you know your signs of stress. Let your family members know when you're stressed and do something about it. Whether that's working out to relieve stress, that's going on vacation to relieve stress, or it's just going for a drive or a run or a walk or whatever. Do what you need to do. The second thing that you need to do is make sure you have a support system, whether that's a loved one, that's somebody at the fire department. I guarantee you that the chief of your department is willing to listen to you when you have stressful moments. In my department in Mormon Lake, when we have stressful calls, I automatically open up a CISM and I bring in folks for my people to talk to. The first time I did it, my fire department here in Mormon Lake was shocked. They're like, what is this? We've never done this before. And then they were very thankful that I did. So, you got to learn how to take care of stress for yourself and do it. Don't let it build up. Know what's going to trigger that. And grief can be triggered by a lot of different things. I will tell you that, I lost my mom a couple years ago, and if I run on somebody that's about her age, that can trigger some grief response. I've run on some calls where kids were killed, and I may run on something else, and that might trigger. So, just know those things and make sure that you're keeping track of them. And then, of course, the things that happen in our regular lives, right? Loss of a relationship or a divorce, or maybe we're going through a financial situation. Don't turn to alcohol, don't turn to drugs, and all of our departments have an EAP program of some kind. Utilize it. Utilize the folks that you look up to in the department, and deal with the stress, because we do have normal reactions. The 5 stages of grief, you guys are probably all familiar with these. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Sometimes we get hung up on one of them. A lot of times it's in that depression. We get stuck in the depression phase, and we just can't seem to get out of that. So you got to do some things if you're caught up in those things. And some of you might even be going through something right now, and maybe when the chief came to you and said, hey, I want you to take this EMR class, you're like, gosh, that's just one more thing to add to me. And it could be a rough patch, but just know that there's always the light at the end of the tunnel. There's always that far end. And sometimes we do need to talk to folks. So feel free to do so. Don't be afraid to sit down and talk with fellow firefighters. Don't be afraid to sit down and talk to the chief. Sometimes we think to ourselves, oh, well, if I talk to the chief, he or she's going to think I'm weak. No, we've been there. I will tell you straight up, I will tell you straight up. I was in the fire department in Flowing Wells Fire just outside of Tucson, Arizona in 1992. I got started in the department there. I was an EMT. 8 months into my job, we ran a call. 82-year-old lady. She's talking to me. I turned around to put her on oxygen, and she coded right there in front of me and my partner. There were two of us on the fire truck. Both of us were EMTs. So we worked her. The ambulance got there with a paramedic. We worked her. I rode into the hospital. We worked her, and she died. I went back to the station, talked to the captain. I told the captain, I'm done. I'm quitting. I can't do this job. This job is not for me. I'm out. And Mike LeBlanc was the guy's name. He's still a friend of mine to this day. Captain LeBlanc looked at me and goes, all right, Western, just slow down. I said, no, sir, you don't understand. I said, I went to school. I became an EMT. I'm supposed to be able to save these people's lives. And this lady just died, and I did all this stuff, and I was done. And he said, listen, he goes, what I want you to do is take the next shift off, because we were on what we called a 2-3, or a 3-4 Kelly. So 24 on, 24 off, 24 on, 24 off, 24 on, and then we had 4 days off. So we were in our middle shift. Take the next shift off. I want you to call somebody who's been in this business, talk to them a little bit, come see me when we get back from our 4-day. All right, sir, I'll do what you said, but I'm just letting you know, when I come back, I'm going to quit. I'm going to turn in my 2 weeks notice, and I'm done. Okay. So I went home. I called a friend of mine who was a nurse, and there in Payson. Talked to her. I literally talked to her almost every single day for the next 5 days. And I was still pretty much convinced that I was done in this job. I couldn't do it. It wasn't for me. Went back, sat down, talked to Captain LeBlanc. I told him, I said, well, I'm not going to quit right now. I said, but I probably won't make it through my probationary year. He goes, just relax. You'll be all right. Come talk to me next shift. And so we talked for a couple more shifts, and here I am, all these years later. Been a paramedic for 34 years. I've seen things 1,000 times worse than that, and I'm still here. So my point in all of this is, you're not alone. We've all gone through it, and you're going to see things, and it's going to make you stressful, and you're going to want to quit, but just keep going. Recognizing stress is important. All of us probably know these things: irritability, changes in our normal disposition, difficulty sleeping. Now, I will tell you, in our job alone, sometimes we have difficulty sleeping. But if you're having nightmares, or you're just not being able to sleep for days on end, talk to somebody. Anxiety, indecisiveness, sometimes that can happen with us. We ran a call and this happened, and now all of a sudden we're afraid to make a decision. I tell every single one of my firefighters, I tell my captains, listen, make a decision. Even if it's the wrong decision, we'll talk about it. Because the first thing I always ask them is, tell me what your thought process is. Even if I think the decision's wrong, they might have a thought process that I go, okay, I can understand that, because I wasn't there. But make a decision. So don't be indecisive. I mean, if you're getting into those situations, then, those are signs of stress. And if you've got guilt, those are signs of stress. Loss of appetite, and loss of interest in sexual relations, interest in work, feeling isolated. One of the worst things we did in the fire service, I mean, it's good, but it's bad. Back when I got started in the fire service, we all slept in the same bunk room. We all ate at the same table. A lot of times today, maybe not so much in our rural departments, but in some of the big cities, every one of them have their own room. They go to their own room when they show up to work. They come out, maybe they grab a bite to eat, they go back in their own room, and they're isolated anyway. To me, isolation is not the way to be. We are herd animals. We like to hang out together, and we need to continue to hang out together. Feelings of hopelessness, obviously alcohol and drug abuse is bad, and physical symptoms, we all know about that stuff. Preventing stress, we kind of already talked on this stuff. Spending time with your friends and family, In our small rural departments, we spend a lot of time not only at the fire station, but we may meet up at the bar later, or the restaurant. In Mormon Lake, we have one restaurant, one bar. They're in the same building. They're in the same next to each other. So everybody meets there. Developing hobbies that are unrelated to the job. I talked about that. I love horseback riding. I love riding my Harley. It's great to be able to leave Mormon Lake right down to Strawberry or to Payson and have breakfast on a Sunday. Just riding a motorcycle down there, get some wind therapy. The snowmobile, all of that kind of stuff. Religious activities, if you've got a minister, make a good relationship with that individual, because when you get into those stressful times, that's a good time to call and talk to them. And then, of course, mental health professionals, we already talked about that. And then I mentioned the CISM, which is the critical incident stress management programs that are available. And they're available to your departments as well. And your chiefs and your battalion chiefs know how to get a hold of those folks. Crew resource management. This is something that we didn't do until recently. The flight crews, because that's where this came from. This came from the airline industry. The flight crews know exactly what crew resource management is because they've been doing it forever. And what we need to do is do it more in our areas. And it's basically the way that team members can work together and have a shared understanding of the situation. We make mistakes, and sometimes there's issues that come up. But if we kind of look at these things and we objectively use that concept that there's always a team leader, there's always the folks that help around, and we're all asking questions, right? Just because I'm the team leader as the paramedic doesn't mean I'm completely 100% autocratic. Now, I will tell you, sometimes when I'm the incident commander, yeah, I become very autocratic. But if you see something, you can kind of ask some probing questions. You can alert me to things. You can say, "Hey, Chief, what do you think?" Or paramedic, whatever. Do you see this? Because this is what I'm seeing. We can challenge some things. Just because I'm the paramedic and I'm going down this road, you might stop me and say, "Hey, do you think this is a stroke? Have we checked the blood sugar? Because maybe we forgot to check the blood sugar." And then, of course, if it's a situation that's very critical and we're about to go down in flames, that's that emergency moment. Hey, let's stop this. We got to hold off. And they do that in the flight. Anybody on that helicopter, anybody on that jet, they can say, "Hey, we're not taking this flight," for whatever reason. And sometimes it could be nothing more than just, I don't have a good gut feeling about this. So that's crew resource management. Workplace safety, obviously, this becomes very important. Rule number one, always make sure your scene is safe. Rule number one, always make sure your scene is safe. Recognize the hazards around you. Have that situational awareness. Your head is now on a swivel. You're, as an EMR, hey, you're responsible for your own safety, and you might be responsible for the entire crew's safety. You've got to have your head on that swivel. I've got to be looking for everything that's going to come get us. What's going to bite us? What's going to get at us? So situational awareness. And if you're not good with situational awareness, let me tell you this, work on it. Have a good sense of what's going on, because anything can get you at any moment in time. When we walk into a situation, we need to be paying attention. Those of you that live in the Payson area, you might remember, if you've been around for any length of time, in the early 90s, Chief Wilson with the Payson Police Department was shot and killed. Chief Wilson was shot and killed by somebody he knew. There was a warrant. He was going to go up and just talk to the guy because he knew him personally. And the guy took him out. Hit home to me because his daughter, Debbie, went to high school with me. She was a good friend of mine. And, Chief Wilson was a great person. He always looked out for us when we were in high school. But again, familiar situation and he went in and it cost him. Sometimes you gotta think about those things and you gotta look and, so always have your head on that swivel. I mentioned Chief LeBlanc or Captain LeBlanc a little bit ago. We went into a situation, he and I went into a situation one time for a suicidal ideation, and the Pima County Sheriff's Office said that they had cleared the scene and it was safe to go in. And we went in and started talking to the guy and asked him about, his plan, if he had a plan. And he goes, yeah, of course I do. And he reached under his pillow and pulled out a gun. We hit the deck really quick. So, things happen. And so you got to be able to recognize those things. And sometimes it's something simple as a rattlesnake, a lot of different things. Infectious diseases, we're going to have a whole chapter on infectious diseases. We're going to talk about bloodborne pathogens. The biggest thing is, we just lived through COVID. I don't know how many of you listened to the COVID stuff and you've been following what's been going on lately. But here's what I will tell you. When we were going through COVID, and I'm not telling you that you should have done this, but when we were going through COVID, I didn't do anything different than I had done the rest of my career. If I would have worn a mask prior to COVID, I wore a mask during COVID. If I wouldn't have, I didn't. And I will tell you, I had some of my firefighters, some of my volunteers, they'd be like, Chief, we ran a call and you didn't wear a mask. And I'm like, yeah, you're right, I didn't. Because the patient didn't warrant a mask. Just because COVID was out there didn't mean that we had to wear masks 24/7. And some of those things are starting to come out now, and we're starting to understand. And as you go through your career and you understand infectious diseases, you're going to understand that just like hazardous materials, there's three things we deal with: time, distance, and shielding. We do the same thing with infectious diseases. Again, going back to my early career, I was a brand new paramedic and I got exposed to a patient that had tuberculosis. And I was freaking out. I'm 25 years old. I'm going to die. Matt LeBlanc, or Chief LeBlanc, called me and said, hey, we just found out this patient was positive for tuberculosis. I about lost my mind. I'm going to die. And he's like, relax. And I'm like, no, Cam, you don't understand. We didn't put a mask on him. We didn't wear an N95 mask. We didn't use the negative pressure in the ambulance. All this stuff we should have done. And he goes, listen, you're okay. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. We didn't do any of this stuff. He goes, Western, you were not with the patient long enough to contract tuberculosis. And I paused for a minute. I went, oh, time, distance, shielding. I was not with them long enough. So even though we didn't need the shielding and the distance, we weren't there long enough. And here I am all these years later, and I have never contracted tuberculosis, never popped positive on a PPD. So just understand those things are out there, and we're gonna talk about them. You in your departments, you should have already had your exposure control course and talked about these things, because it's one of the very first things you have to do when you go to work for the fire department. So again, routes of transmission: direct contact. This is where you physically touch it. Airborne droplets, that's how tuberculosis gets given to us. It's also the way that they said COVID would be spread. And then, of course, contact with infected blood. I mentioned earlier about the HIV, in the 80s and the early 90s, we were all going to die. And then we figured out that the minute HIV hits the air, it dies. So, I don't worry about that. Now, hepatitis, on the other hand, it can lay dormant for a few days and week even. And you come by and get it wet and it suddenly is no longer dormant. So your departments should offer you the hepatitis B vaccination. If you haven't had it, you can get it, or you need to sign a declaration that says you don't want it. MRSA, we've all probably known patients that have had MRSA. We've probably dealt with patients that have MRSA. When it comes to that kind of stuff, make sure you're following your protocols. In those situations, we're going to put on masks. We're going to put on eye protection. We always wear gloves with every patient. And you're going to practice putting gloves on and taking them off. And so, just make sure we know that. Airborne pathogens, Again, tuberculosis, COVID-19, the SARS, so many different things. And when it comes to airborne, we're going to wear an N95 mask because that kind of stops it from getting through and into our system. But time distance shielding, same thing with hazardous materials. Here's a picture of the N95s. If you remember during COVID, we were giving everybody surgical masks and telling them this is going to work. The reality is, no, it isn't. It'll help, but it's not going to really work. N95 is designed specifically to not allow those airborne pathogens in. The other thing that drove me nuts during COVID, and I'll get off my high horse on this, but going to the grocery store and seeing the clerks with the gloves on and touching all my food and then touching everybody else's food and then grabbing their phone and all this other stuff. I'm like, you really don't even understand what you're doing. You're just putting gloves on because somebody told you to do it. That's not the right reason. When we wear gloves, when we wear masks, we use those for one specific patient, then we replace them and put new ones on. That's how we truly protect ourselves. Bloodborne pathogens, again, you've probably all had this through your fire department. If you haven't, I would imagine you're having it soon. But you've got your AIDS, your HIV, your hepatitis B, your hepatitis C. Most all of these come through infected blood. And if you've got other body fluids like saliva, you're not going to connect anything from a bloodborne pathogen in saliva. The problem is, and the reason we don't want this stuff on us is, I don't know about you, but every once in a while I bite my cheek when I eat. And then it starts to bleed. Or I bite my tongue once in a while. And then there's blood in it. Or, maybe I just had recent dental work or whatever. So there's always the possibility of blood in all of the different body fluids. So just be aware of that. You do have an exposure control plan in your department, and you've got an exposure control officer. Those are your main points of contact. If you've got an exposure, whether it's splashed in your eye or those kinds of things, the biggest thing is just don't take a needle and shove it into your body. HIV, hepatitis B, we've already talked enough about this. Meningitis and syphilis are both spread by contact with contaminated blood. I mean, the contaminated blood's always going to be an issue. Standard precautions, we wear gloves. Most of us don't wear latex when most of us wear nitrile. The reason being is because there are people who are allergic to latex, and we don't know who they are when we're touching them as an EMT or an EMR as a paramedic. Protective mask and eyewear. Know where this stuff is on your department's apparatus. Again, don't touch any patients without gloves on. And always wash your hands. The biggest thing we can do, and we all learned this, right? We learned it as kindergartners. Wash your hands after going to the bathroom, if you remember that little ditty. But wash your hands. Soap, water. The biggest thing is the actual rubbing motion, and use some warm water. Never recap needles. This is stuff we used to do in the old days. We would recap them, or my favorite was always when we stuck them in the bench seat of the ambulance. We did some stupid stuff in the early 90s. But don't do any of that stuff. That's just ridiculous. How we all survived, I have no idea. Airborne, we already talked about that a little bit. COVID-19, I think you've probably been inundated with COVID-19. And the thought process behind all of that. The biggest thing is make sure you're using N95 masks. And I know all your departments have them because it's required. Make sure you're wearing your gloves. We still talk about the 6 feet of distance. I'm not going to worry about that, and I don't think you should either. We're going to walk up, we're going to talk to our patient. Now, if the patient's coughing or something like that, and you don't have all your protective equipment, all right, stay back 6 feet. Don't let them cough on you. But, make sure that you're doing that stuff. And again, that hand hygiene, that washing your hands, the best thing you can do for yourself is wash your hands. because your skin is the greatest barrier you have. So even if you get blood on your skin, which I've done it even recently, something happens and the glove breaks, or, I tend to wear a lot of long sleeves even in the summertime, but, maybe I get some blood on my arm or whatever. You just wash it off. It ain't going to hurt anything. Medical glove removal is a skill that you're going to be practicing, and we'll be doing that on September 26th when we're all together. We'll be practicing putting on gloves, and then after that, you'll be able to start helping with some patient care because you'll have enough knowledge as an EMR to be able to do that. But so we're going to talk about gloves and eyes and masks and gloves and all of that stuff and how to get it fitted for you. Some of it you've probably already done, maybe all of it. Your departments, you've probably practiced it in your department or whatever. Doffing infectious disease stuff. Here's the thing: putting it on is easy. It's the part that taking it off. And if you really want to do something really cool, do this. Put on a pair of latex or nitrile gloves, and then dip them in paint. And then try to take those off without getting any paint on yourself. It's a neat way to see if you can really get out of your PPE without contaminating yourself. It's fun. You should try it. Immunizations. We talked about this. Hepatitis B vaccination. The fire department will offer that to you, but you don't have to take it. Today, they usually do hepatitis A and hepatitis B together. And most kids, I use kids and anybody under the age of 30, just for the record. But most kids today have been vaccinated against Hep A and Hep B because of the fact that they were required to go to school. Seasonal flu vaccines, if you want to do that, that's up to you. Obviously, tetanus, you got to get those every 10 years. Chickenpox vaccines. For those of us that are older, you might think about the shingles vaccine, MMR, which is the German measles, and then, of course, tuberculosis testing, which is PPD testing. Responding to the scene, this is where we kind of get into that scene safety stuff. We talked about this. You want to be safe. You want to look out for the safety of all the people that are on your team. Some of you might be the team leader. Some of you might be a lieutenant or a captain in your fire district. So you're looking out for the entire team. But it doesn't matter if you're the lowest person on the totem pole or you're the fire chief. Always be looking out for the safety of you and your people, because without you, we can do nothing. And driving safely, fastening seatbelts. I hope it's written in your written policy that you will not turn a wheel on your apparatus until everybody is seatbelted in. I can tell you that I believe your departments, just as my department, are all insured by VFIS, and therefore that is a requirement that you wear your seatbelt. And I can tell you that there's been a lot of times when I've seen people trying to get in their turnout gear without their seat, while we're going down the road. It's not safe. I don't recommend it. Dispatch, we're going to use the information that we get from them. Again, in rural areas, sometimes we're waiting a while for the police department. If your chief or your captain says, hey, we should be safe, I would trust them. They've probably been around long enough. I can tell you that, there are times when we go into overdoses, and based off of what dispatch tells me, I make a decision. Hey, we're going to go ahead and go in and try to help this person. And then there's other times we don't. We sit back and wait 45 minutes for the sheriff's office to get here. So, it's just the experience of the people that are above you, and eventually you'll have those same experiences. You'll be able to hear from what the dispatcher's saying, or you'll know what questions to ask the dispatcher to determine whether you need to continue to go in or just hold back. Parking the vehicle, always park so that you're safe, protect yourself. This is stuff you probably learned in the fire service and in your weekly trainings or your monthly trainings as volunteers. Put the vehicle between you and whatever scene you're dealing with. If you're on a highway, wear your safety vest. At Mormon Lake, one of the years, I bought all of my personnel safety vests and gave them to them. These are yours, and wear them. So, make sure you're doing that kind of stuff. And even if you're wearing turnout gear, put a safety vest on top of it so that people can see you more. Scan the area. This is, again, keeping your head on a swivel, controlling traffic. Sometimes as an EMR, sometimes as a volunteer firefighter, we're going to be the ones controlling traffic. In a lot of areas, we may be lucky to have one sheriff's officer initially. So we might have to think about controlling traffic ourselves. If it's a crime or it's a violent scene, make sure that we're safe. And if it is a violent scene or, it is a crime scene, be careful where you walk. Be careful where you step. Be careful what you touch. I'll give you a prime example. 3 years ago, we get called out for 2 people that are camping and they're both unresponsive. We get out there, park the units. I walk up, there's a guy sitting in a chair. And I look at him and you can tell he's deceased and he's been gone for at least 12 hours. He's got rigor mortis and lividity all set in. And I start walking around the scene and there's another guy laying under a blanket. I lift the blanket up and he's the same way. And it was a murder-suicide situation. I immediately notified sheriff's office and everybody else that it was a crime scene. I had the rest of my crew not even walk into the scene. Stay back. That way, my boots were the only ones in there. I had to make mental notes of everything that I did, how it looked when I first got there, because the law enforcement folks needed all of that for their deal. It was a strange scene. It was just weird, but whatever happened, happened. So, be careful with that stuff and only go in when it's necessary, only move things when it's necessary. But if you do move something, note where it was at, because that can become very important, especially when it comes to trying to get a conviction. So crowds, sometimes you may just have to hold the crowd back. Sometimes your job as the EMR might be to protect the scene from while somebody else is doing some things. Electrical hazards, we all know we're not going to go pulling electrical wires off of somebody, unless we know for sure that they have been turned off and that they are safe to move. We also know there's some emergency ways we can move some stuff like that. And when you're going into situations, whether it's rope rescues or we're going to be extricating out of a vehicle, wear your helmet, have your chin strap in place, and a face shield to protect your eyes. Fires, we're all working for fire districts, so we've probably been trained in some level of firefighting, whether it's basic fire skills at State Fire School or maybe we had our own little in-house academy where we trained you to use SCBAs and things like that. So if you are trained as a firefighter, follow those protocols. If you are not, if you work for the fire district and you haven't been through SCBA training, or you haven't been through the basic fire skills at State Fire School, you're fairly new in this, please don't put on an SCBA and go into a burning building. I do not believe there's one fire district that's on this program that has that as a protocol that says, oh, you came to work today? All right, great. Put an SCBA on and get in there. I just don't believe that's the case. There's other things to do. You can set up the rehabs. You can do some other things like that. So if you if you're new and you haven't been trained on those things, don't go putting them on and trying to go into a building. Just make sure that you're following your protocols and being safe at all times. Hazardous materials. Some of you may be trained already in hazardous materials. Myself, I've been trained at the technician level. So I was, in fact, a glowworm in my previous life. And when I went to hazmat tech school, I really didn't want to go, but the department said you're going because you're the captain and you're going to be one of the captains on the hazmat team. So I ended up going. Glad I did, learned a lot. But there's 3 levels of hazardous materials training that we deal with in the fire service. Awareness level is about an 8-hour class, and that's basically we just teach you to recognize that there's a hazmat scene and stay away from it. The operations level, which is approximately 40 to 48 hours of training, and that's where we teach you how to recognize it, but then we also teach you how to start the process of evacuating and stuff like that. And then the technician level, which right after 9/11, every fire department in the nation was getting a hazmat team because the federal government was throwing money at us like it was going out of style. Today, that's not the case. Most of us may still have access to some hazardous materials equipment. Here in Coconino County, we do have a trailer that's got a bunch of hazmat equipment on it. But the reality is, when it comes to a hazmat scene, we call the state Department of Transportation, DPS. They bring out their hazmat team and they deal with it. But back in the old days, we had our own little hazmat team, and we got to play around with the chemicals and do all kinds of fun stuff. And so, those are the 3 levels. And the hazmat technician level is about 160 hours worth of training, and you learn how to go put on the level A suits and go inside and the hot zone and grab stuff. And we used to have a lot of fun because on Mondays was our hazmat training day. And so if we worked Monday, everybody would bring something from home. We wouldn't tell each other what it was. And then you has-catted it to try to figure out what it was, or at least what classification it was. We had some fun with it. It was a lot of fun. When it comes to vehicles, obviously, and other unstable objects, if you've been trained in vehicle extrication, you went to state fire school and got that, or maybe your department has had somebody come out and go through that kind of stuff. You learned how to stabilize vehicles. You learned how to protect yourselves and the different things like that, buildings, stabilities, and all of that kind of stuff. But if you're in a situation and you just don't know, call somebody who does. Don't go into an unstable environment just because, hey, we're with the fire department, because that's dangerous, and that's what gets us killed. Sharp objects, these are always available at motor vehicle crashes. I've cut myself a few times, and unfortunately, I'm a little bit older now. I'm in my mid-50s. And sometimes it just seems like I can walk by something and suddenly I'm bleeding off my hand or my arm or something. I don't fully understand it. And, it's crazy because I can lay in bed and feel a speck of dirt. But when I cut myself, I can't even feel the fact that I cut myself. It's not until I see the blood flowing down my arm that I'm like, oh, look, I cut myself. So, wear your gloves, make sure you're protecting yourself. If you're going to a motor vehicle accident and you're going to be doing any extrication, it's full turnouts. And if your department is saying, oh, you don't need that, I doubt that's happening because I know your chiefs. But sometimes, we try to get a little lax, or maybe we're in a hurry and we don't fully put on our PPE before we do those things. And all that is just a recipe for disaster. If you're going into something and there's a possibility that you might get blood on yourself, you can put some medical gloves on and then put your firefighting gear or your firefighting gloves, or maybe some heavy leather gloves for wildland firefighting, those kinds of things. You can put those over those nitrile gloves. They work just fine. Can't tell you the number of times I've gone into a house where a little dog tried to bite my ankle. We always try to get them to lock their dogs up into another room, but I love this. Can be pets, farm stock, or wild. I'm sure every one of us has the situation where, the elk or the deer run into us. But you know, you might get called, especially there in the young area. You know, maybe somebody got hurt in the field and the bull's still loose. You might want to put the bull away before you go in there. So kind of look at those things. And the biggest thing you've got to be concerned about are the house dogs and the ones that are very protective of their owners. Even the little teeny tiny ones, they can be some of the biggest ankle biters. So we always try to get them put away in someplace else. Environmental conditions. In the wintertime, it gets really cold in Mormon Lake. Sometimes it'll drop into the minus degrees. I'm hoping this year is one of those because I'm really hoping we get a lot of snow. In Mormon Lake, we average about 120 inches of snowfall. Last year, we barely broke 60 inches of snowfall. This year, I'm hoping we get about 180 inches of snowfall. But dress appropriately. You know, all my personnel, and I'm sure you all have too, we have parkas. So those can be broken into 3 different pieces or put all together. And then, you know, layer. And it's the same thing in the summertime. But be alert, be ready. Dry uncomfortableness. The biggest thing is make sure your patients are comfortable. When you put them in the back of the ambulance, sometimes we're sweating and the patient's still freezing. You have to live with that. We're going to sweat to try to keep the patient comfortable. And then, of course, lighting. Always have lights, whether they're headlamps or you've got good scene lighting off your trucks or portable lighting. Water rescues. I think every one of us have areas where we're going to do water rescues, some ice rescues even, confined space or below grade rescues. If you've not been trained in these areas, you don't do them. Somebody in your department probably has been. I know State Fire School's coming up here. I'm sending a couple of folks to rope rescue class, but I've been trained in all of that stuff too. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. We have a couple of lakes. We do some water rescue things, so we have all the gear to do that. But if you haven't been trained, please don't just throw on equipment and go in there. I will tell you the very first water rescue I ever did in my life was back when I was 18 years old. When I was in high school, I worked at the Taylor Pool there at Rumsey Park in Payson as a lifeguard. And then I was a volunteer firefighter. And I remember we had somebody that tried to drive across the East Verde River out there at Verde Lakes Estate or East Verde Park. And the fire department looked at me and said, "Hey, you're the one trained. You go do it." That was fun. It happens. Good times. So biggest thing is this can be physically and emotionally demanding. So take care of yourself. Make sure you have in place the resources to be able to take care of yourself. That is the biggest thing that I will say to you when it comes to that. And is there anything in the chat? I don't see anything in the chat. So at this point, we'll go ahead and open it up. We got roughly a half hour, but we can be out of here in 5 or 10 minutes if you'd like. Doesn't matter to me. But I want to open it up to you guys, give you an opportunity, any questions, anything we talked about. And if I was boring, please let me know because I'll try to step up my game. But anything you guys want me to go over again, or maybe just kind of explain a little bit different, talk to me. Are you all asleep?
No, we understand. I understand everything you said.
But anyway,
Very understanding. Very good.
All right, good.
So I did mention something earlier. If you weren't able to get in and see the slides, if you go in through the browser, don't use a browser, go in through the Zoom app in order to get into the meeting, and you'll be able to see the slides and all the other connections.
Thank you. That's what I'll have to do.
I was going to tell you, Linda. So
I
if you need
figured.
help, if you need help, let me know.
And that's
And
going to
you
be
know I
our
will.
last, and that's going to be our number 3 Easter egg, is that information right there. Make sure you use the app. That way you can see the slides. Great information, and thank you for that. Anything else? If not, then we'll call it an evening. Once you get your books, there will be oh, Bob, that's not, we made John, right? Bob Smith is John, is that right?
Correct, John.
Good. You don't need to worry about the Easter eggs, but if you do miss a class, you'll just send me an email with the 3 Easter eggs that I put in that class.
Fair enough.
But if you attend live, you don't have to worry about it. And my email address, in case you didn't get it, which I think I sent all you guys an email, but it's real simple. It's sean.western@yahoo.com. And my phone number is my cell phone. So I'm going to give that to you so you make sure you've got it. And that's 928-856-1345. And that's on my hip 24/7. I will tell you that after 10 p.m., it goes into do not disturb. Otherwise, people would be calling me all night long. And it'll open back up at about 7 a.m. So unless it's an emergency, nobody's getting a hold of me between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. But if there's nothing else, I will cut you all loose. I will see you next Wednesday. And once you get your textbook, like I said, and you go in and you access that navigate, make sure you put in that code, which is the 86B263. And that'll be your course ID. And that'll get you in, and you'll be able to see all kinds of fun stuff. And you can communicate with me in there as well. But it'll have the quizzes for you to practice, and there'll be some other stuff that you can learn and things like that. So good night, everyone.
Hey, Sean,
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
do we need the workbook or not?
You don't need the workbook.
Okay, just wanted to check and see.